If I'm not doing like an actual lecture, I just wing it.
So it's just taking a few minutes to load.
If I'm not doing like an actual lecture, I just wing it.
Okay. Well, the good news is I think it works, so that's good.
Sounds like there's a cute little delay on it.
Yeah, unfortunately, there usually is a little bit of a delay. But to our guests, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining the Albany Institute of History and Art for our Indigenous Peoples Day programming. My name is Victoria Waldron. I am the museum educator here at the Albany Institute, and I am so happy to be joined by, and I just welcome wholeheartedly everyone who's going to be taking part in our discussion today. So we have Charlie Burgess from the Open Space Institute, Heather Bruegl from Forage Project, and Abraham Francis from the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. I'm going to turn it right over to them to introduce themselves. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat. I will make sure that I just send a quick message so you know where the chat is. And Abraham, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, so sego gwego definitely te yungyats nene Haudenosaunee nene kahaga nene Akwesasne nene wakachlono. So hi, my name is Abraham Francis. I am Mohawk of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy from the Mohawk community of Akwesasne and Deer Clan. And I work as the Environmental Services Manager for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, which provides, as it sounds, environmental services in a diverse way. So we assess development projects. We do a variety of research projects throughout the community on fish, on water. And basically my main job is listening to my community and then translating that into projects, which I then implement for the empowerment of my community. And everything I do is culturally grounded within who we are. So our whole program is based on the Untitled, which is the Thanksgiving address, as some may know it. And yeah, I just love it. I absolutely love it. And I'm really appreciative to be here and to have this discussion today. Now.
Thank you. Heather, if you don't mind going next.
My name is Heather Bruegl. I am enrolled citizen of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, which is also part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. First line descendant, Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation. My name in our language is Kishuk-Unkwe, which stands for, which means sunflower in full bloom. I am the education director for Forage Project, which is a new initiative in the Mahicanatuck River Valley, upstate New York. You know it as the Hudson River Valley. And so I'm very excited to be part of this panel and my work with Forage, where we're raising the awareness and experience of Indigenous artists, writers, scholars, giving them a platform, using us as a platform so that we can raise awareness of who they are, but also offering fellowships, bringing in great speakers, working on land back, land justice, all sorts of things that had no clue I was going to work on when I was younger. I just wanted to be a teacher, and now I'm teaching at a different platform on a different level. So I'm super stoked. I'm formally the Director of Cultural Affairs for Stockbridge-Munsee Community. So I was able to work for one of my home nations for a couple of years. So very honored to have done that. I'm very excited to be here, have great conversation, share knowledge, and talk about Forage and all the great work that's happening in each of our organizations. So Onewe.
Heather, thank you so much. And last but not least, Charlie.
Hi, I'm Charlie Burgess. I work for the Open Space Institute, non-native. I was going to do an introduction in Irish Gaelic briefly, but my accent is so terrible that it just would have been, but diolch. I'm a land steward for OSI. OSI protects land from Maine to Florida. We focus on public land for recreation, water quality, climate change resilience, and access. And as a land steward, I steward an area that is roughly coextent with the Mohican homeland from south of the Catskills to the Adirondacks. And in grad school, my background is in archaeology and American Indian studies. And I studied the same homeland from sort of from a geographic kind of perspective. So the same lands that I was studying as a grad student, I'm now stewarding for OSI. And I'm just very grateful to be here with Heather and Abraham, and ready to talk.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we did have a few people actually send a few questions they have in advance. So I thought we would start with Ellen's question, since I got those first. And she would like to know a little bit more about the current situation of Mohawk or Iroquois people in New York State.
I guess I could jump on that one. As a Mohawk, so Haudenosaunee is the traditional name that we have for ourselves, and Iroquois was a name that was given to us. And there's an interesting background on it, like something like it means like it was something I think the Huron or somebody called us. We were like, they called us a snake, because if you poked the snake, it would bite you. I always thought that was really interesting, but like Haudenosaunee is, it means the people of the Longhouse, and that's who we are. We don't live in teepees. And the current state of what I would call like the Mohawks of New York is we're still here, and we're still exerting ourselves on these landscapes in very interesting ways. There's kind of like a couple of different communities. So Akwesasne is sort of the main Mohawk community in New York, but then we have Gunajohalege, which was a farm and cultural center that was created by Tom Porter. And then we have Ganyange, which is kind of a hour from where we are here in Akwesasne. And that was just an area that was reclaimed. We just went there and we reclaimed it. And I think that that's like a really important conversation about land back. And I'm so grateful that Heather threw that out there about land back. But we're here, we're thriving. We have challenges, history and states and counties and, governments have not always been kind to us. So this is the reality that we have to live with, is the inheritance of that history of colonial violence. And that's just like a part of what, this Indigenous Peoples Day is about too, is recognizing that history and how it impacted us. So for like Akwesasne in specific, we are subjected to two areas of concern, because we are bisected by the international border, split between Canada and United States. And what happened was there wasn't great regulations around this. So companies used to be able to just dump toxins into the environment. And the impact is that it just caused really dramatic impacts on our environment. And there's like all these biological use impairments. This is stuff that I have to work on and regularly have to talk about. And the main reason I'm bringing this up is the recognition that ecological violence that we experienced in our community had impacts on our cultural integrity. So we lost pieces of our language in this battle of trying to connect for ourselves. But I also want to sort of take a moment to recognize that like Akwesasne is one of the most educated First Nation Native American community in the United States and Canada. And I think what we've done is we've gotten really good at playing the game. So I think the United States and a lot of these different governments and these systems were very great at being strategic and trying to keep us out of the conversation. But we've gotten really good at it. We have our own scientists, we have our own doctors, we have our own lawyers, we have our own politicians. And so we are showing up for ourselves and our communities and asserting our rights on these landscapes. And fighting for those rights regularly. So I know that was a very roundabout description of who we are and where we are at. But let's just say we're getting our lands back. we're asserting our rights. We are cleaning up our environment. We're calling home our language and our teachings that were so impacted by residential schools and colonial violence as it manifests itself within educational systems, both through the grade school, high school dynamics up through college. And so I'm just proud to say that I'm here and I'm alive. And, you know, I'm not a descendant. I am Mohawk. I'm unapologetically queer and Mohawk and asserting myself and my space wherever I get to go. So, yeah.
Abraham, thank you. I would also like to hear from Heather, probably a similar question, but about for people who are Mohican.
Yeah, so it's interesting when you are Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican, because the seat of government now sits in Northeast Wisconsin, right? So it's no longer in what we consider our ancestral homelands, you know, from parts of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Vermont, Massachusetts. Those are our homelands. And so it's really funny for me being Oneida and Stockbridge-Munsee. So one side of the river is my Mohican ancestors, and the other side of the river is my Haudenosaunee Oneida ancestors. So it's like, oh, great. I love that. But it's interesting because I think a lot of times when you look at New England area, you think of pilgrims and ships coming in and the formation of our government, which I wholeheartedly admit that, you know, I am obsessed with early colonial history. I love it. I think it's huge. It's amazing, and you can learn so much from it. But you don't think about the Haudenosaunee or the Mohican or the Lenape, the Narragansett, all the other tribes that were there first, the nations that were there first. And I do know, like in Canada, they refer to us First Nations, and here we say Native Americans or tribal communities. I really think it should be First Nations across the board, because we weren't just tribes, we were nation states of people, right? So we already had our own governments, our own councils, our own way that we did things. And so when we were through colonization, we were then displaced by settler colonialism. So while, you know, you hear Trail of Tears, you think of the Cherokee, tragic, but there was also a Trail of Tears that led those northeastern New England tribes away from their area. And so, I mean, there's a reason there's an Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and New York. Do you know what I mean? So there's like, most of us were moved, and so we were in Wisconsin. Same with Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation. Mohican Nation was moved several times along what we call our own Trail of Tears, where our seat of government now lies in Northeast Wisconsin. And so, but through the diligent work of a lot of community members, a lot of tribal employees, that presence in the Northeast is coming back. So when I formally worked for the tribe, I made it a goal that I wanted Stockbridge-Munsee history to basically throw up all over our homelands. I wanted it to where no matter where you were, you knew about Mohican Nation, Stockbridge-Munsee, you knew something about us. And I think that's really important to bring awareness to that, because again, when you think of New England, you don't think of those First Nations that were still there. You think of Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and all of that, instead of, you know, the people who were there in the first place. And it's also important to note that in those formations of government and in that early formation of what would become the United States government, who did they model that after? They modeled it after the Haudenosaunee. So it's very important to say we were the inspiration for the democracy that you have today. So it's important to note that out. But as far as presence, I think Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation is making great strides at getting that presence known out there.
Thank you. Charlie, did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Well, I guess I could add that, you know, it's an interesting question, because there's this sort of notion that this sort of like trope of the vanishing Indian, that like at some distant time in the past, there were Indians, and weren't they wonderful, but now they're all gone. And I grew up in the Mohican homeland, kind of right on the border with the Mohawk homeland. And in school growing up, I learned exclusively about the Mohawk. Didn't even really know about the Mohican people, and it was only much later that learning kind of got to me. But it's really striking that narrative continues to kind of play out, that Native American people are either not here, or they're not really Native anymore, or something like that. That is just, aside from being wrong, it's harmful to, it's harmful to the people it's harmful to non-Native people. Walking around with a distorted view of reality is harmful in the first place, but it also, it also has implications for the way we manage land and the way we plan for land use and all those sorts of things that I think we would be much stronger a people if we really understood both the history and the present.
Thank you. So I think we've covered a number of Ellen's questions. So I think we're all set on that front. And I do have some more questions actually from Alexis, which I think will be interesting and thought-provoking, or at least I thought they were when I first read them. So Alexis is asking, should we refer to all land in North America as unceded territory?
Unequivocally, yes. Unequivocally, yes. It is all unceded. It is all forced removal. And here's my reason why. And I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning, but I have a background in history and political science. I'm not just talking out of my butt. This is why. The reason it should be referred to as unceded is, yes, there were land cessions, land agreements, treaties being written, whatever. But those treaties that were being written and those land cessions and agreements were written in a language that was not indigenous to this continent. So how can you knowingly consent to something that you're not aware of, that you don't understand, that's not written in your language? So for me personally, at a personal level, the entire United States, Canada, Mexico, it is all unceded land. We could not agree to something that we cannot understand if we cannot understand the language that it is written in.
So it looks like there's also some questions related to land acknowledgements. So Alexis said that when many people begin their land acknowledgements, they recognize the idea that they are maybe on unceded territory. Would you consider it a disservice to particularly unceded lands where a sovereign Native nations is in dispute with property owners or a US state?
I don't think I understand the question.
So I think what Alexis is asking, and Alexis, if you're watching, please feel free to enter into the chat if I'm misunderstanding the question. Is it a disservice to only refer to one area or one bit of unceded territory instead of referring to the entire continent of North America as unceded territory? Do you think it's a disservice?
I would say no, I don't think it's a disservice, because if you're doing a land acknowledgement, which, shame on me, I should have acknowledged that I'm coming to this panel from the land of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. So I'm in southeastern Michigan, so shame on me for not doing that at the beginning. But I think when you are acknowledging a particular area, I think that's fine. I think it's fine to, refer to that as unceded. And I think across the board, though, we should do land acknowledgements where it's acknowledging that it's unceded. So whether you're coming from Michigan, Oklahoma, New York State, like it's all unceded. I don't think you have to, in every land acknowledgement, refer to the United States as a whole as unceded, even though it is. If you were doing a land acknowledgement for the entire United States, it would take days because there's so many First Nations. I think for if you could just focus in on the particular area that you're talking about at first, and that those would just be my thoughts on it. But I'm open to hear what others would say.
Well, I think like land acknowledgements require that specificity. Like you should be acknowledging where you are, who are those people. I'm actually getting sick of land acknowledgements because people keep sending them to me for me to comment on them. And I'm booked and busy. So, but you know, like what I often see is a lack of acknowledgement of the specific communities and the communities that continue to exist within that area. In a lot of ways, I see land acknowledgements written from this like historical concept and sort of the like, you know, it kind of evokes that like disappearing Indian perspective. And, you know, and I really hate hearing those terms like descendant. You know, like there's certain terms that I feel like that oftentimes land acknowledgements run into, but also within the conversation of land acknowledgements is what is being done with that. Are you just simply acknowledging that this land was stolen from First Nations, or are you actually going to do anything for the communities, make some action behind it? Because our words can be beautiful, but they could be empty, and that's not useful to living, thriving cultures in this day and age. So my challenge is, yes, say a land acknowledgement. I think it's important, but also recognize the fact that there needs to be some action behind those land acknowledgements. It's not just recognizing, it's also trying to do something. And this is where I think the land back movement becomes really important in the conversation, but also the empowerment of Indigenous peoples and communities. How are you going to help that out? So that's my perspective on land acknowledgements. You know, what I like to use as my land acknowledgement is the Yohandakaluwadakwa. I think that's my land acknowledgement, because I like the way that it recognizes all of my relations, all of creation in this area, literally acknowledging the land as a part of the process of what we're doing. And that's just like my perspective on land acknowledgements. I am not an expert in ceded and unceded. I try not to go into those kinds of things because it's the whole history around it is so complicated, specifically for the Haudenosaunee in New York State. And the agreements that were made, and you know, the complications around it, that New York State made treaties with the Haudenosaunee, and they had no business doing that. That was a federal government level ability that New York State took, and now we're still fighting in battles about it. But also the Indian agents that exerted so much influence in our communities for an extended period of time will lease out our lands with 99-year leases. And under that idea, like, we weren't supposed to be here, but surprise, here we are, and we're still doing what we're doing. So, you know, in a lot of ways, we have subverted so much of what was intended for us. We're still here, we're still thriving, we're happy. You know, challenges are the challenges that we have to confront, but I think as communities, like, we come together and stand up for each other. So yeah, I guess land acknowledgements, do them, but like make sure you do them right and acknowledge the people and be as specific as possible. And if you can use some of the language from the people in using their like actual like names for themselves instead of the names that like colonizers gave us, that would be really great too. Yeah, so that's what I have to offer.
I think Heather's point before about wanting to kind of broadcast Mohican culture across the landscape it seems really important here. Certainly, I mean, I'm not, you know, because I think most people just really don't know. You know, they're walking around just, wow, isn't this landscape so beautiful? Aren't these, you know, I wonder if there were people here. You know, the thought might cross their minds, but they just haven't been educated. And so, you know, I mean, I know a land acknowledgement is a very small step, but one thing that it can do is sort of monument, like, you know, not only was this land stolen, but the people it was stolen from are still here, and these are who they are, you know, and that in itself, I think, can have some power to it. And of course, it does immediately beg the question, now that we know, what are we doing about it?
Very much so. And I think just to piggyback off of what Charlie and Abraham said, like, they're like, particularly what Abraham said about there has to be action. Like, that's great if you put words down to a paper, but they don't mean anything if they don't live off of that paper. And to Charlie's point about them being, it's just, you know, it's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction, you know, of doing the land acknowledgement. And then just to speak to what Abraham said, like, I'll read your land acknowledgement, but you can't get mad at me if I send it back to you with a lot of markups on it, because there's a reason you sent it to me. And so, yeah, I revised someone's land acknowledgement the other day, and I felt really bad about it at the end, but I was like, I hope they understand. I'm just trying to help them.
Wonderful, thank you. So I do have a few comments from the YouTube stream that I do want to share. Alexis is watching, and they just want to say thank you so much. They really appreciate your responses. I also have a question from Lori, and I believe she's referring to Canaan, New York. And Lori has asked, in Canaan, we are told that the land was originally occupied by Stockbridge Indians. How do they relate to the Indigenous people we are talking about? That is a great question. So what I would say is that the Stockbridge-Munsee are also part of the Mohican Nation, and they would have had territory here, and they still have territory here, which I'm sure my guest panelists can help me out with.
Stockbridge-Munsee and Mohican Nation are one and the same. Stockbridge is the colonized name given to those who were settled in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which prior to it being a mission town was a Mohican village. From there, I'm trying to do this in like a nutshell because I usually do this history in an hour. So from there, when it became a missionary town, other Indigenous tribes came to the area. So you had not just Mohican Nation, but you had Oneida and Mohawks and Narragansetts and Pequots and all of those people. And because I'm assuming laziness, the settlers in the area dubbed us all Stockbridge Indians. Just when they changed the name of the town, they decided to refer to us all as Stockbridge Indians. The Munsee, who are part Lenape, the dialect of the Lenape language, joined with the Stockbridge, later then known as Stockbridge. We went from Stockbridge Indians to Stockbridge Mohicans. Then in like 1822, when we were in Wisconsin, a group of Munsee joined and became, then we became the Stockbridge-Munsee Community. So the name even has a history of itself. We've always referred to ourselves, you'll see it on tribal seals, you'll see it on the websites, Stockbridge-Munsee Community, Stockbridge-Munsee Band of the Mohican Indians, Stockbridge-Munsee Community Mohican Nation, like, or just Mohican Nation. But Stockbridge-Munsee Community, Mohican Nation, same thing. It's a very complicated history.
Thank you. Awesome. So I do have another question that I was hoping to ask you all. And this is from Anya, and Anya asks, when did the public, and by public, we're referring to people outside of Indigenous communities, become involved or interested in the land reclamation movement? And there's sort of a second part of this, were those relationships helpful?
I wouldn't say like this is a really hard question. I feel like it's really, really new. And in regards to helping, getting like land back and stuff, like getting land back, I think that, I'm really grateful for the work that like Charlie's done and like other people have done in empowering, but I feel like on more of like a larger mainstream level, which can I even say mainstream in this relationship? Like we got the Wet'suwet'en people fighting for resisting a pipeline, and then there's line 3 that's going on right now, and resistance for that work. But what I have to say in regards to this is recognizing that Indigenous people need to be the head of these movements. If you're not an Indigenous person, you cannot go into those spaces and occupy too much space. You have to acknowledge that this is ours and not be like demanding too much of us, because remember, like we are dealing with this reality and all the pressures that come with it. Allyship really isn't up, like we don't have the time to define it for you. I think it's been defined so many times. Like people need to do their research. I don't know how many times I get asked for people for a reading list or to send people resources, and how am I going to be a good ally? And I'm just like, I don't have time to deal with this right now. It's like another level of emotional and mental energy that we have to exert in order to do that. Now, again, I also have like conflicting thoughts around this, because it's like and another aspect of it too, like I want to build healthy relationships with collaborators and allies. I know that there's great allies out there that can support your work that are these non-Indigenous folks, but I don't know, it's a really difficult thing from my perspective. I think it's been good, but I think at other opportunities, sometimes there's sort of this white savior complex that gets introduced into the environment that can be incredibly detrimental to the movement. But also understanding what land back means. That like when we're talking about land back, oftentimes there's this perception that land back is from this Western colonial framework, that we're going to kick people out of it and it's only going to be exclusive for the Native communities and this, that, and the other thing. But that's applying that Western colonial framework of ownership to a space. And if we approach it from, our like Indigenous roots and from our shared resource, our shared relationship network, I think that can be really beautiful. For us, we would approach a shared space with the One Dish, One Spoon Treaty, which is all about sharing and caring for each other. So we have a lot to offer, but sometimes when I enter into these conversations, I get really nervous of what that's going to look like, the allyship aspect of it. And yeah, sometimes allyship looks like setting up chairs at an event, and that's okay. And sometimes reflecting on being accountable for what you say. It may have come from the most beautiful place, but sometimes people do bad things without meaning it. They're like, well, I didn't mean to hurt anybody's feeling, but you did. Acknowledge it and accept that accountability in that process, and we can grow from this. That like accountability isn't something to be afraid of. It's a learning opportunity.
Literally not falling apart when we correct that indiscretion that you may have made, because oh my God, I'm tired of holding people's hands. Like I can't do that anymore. I'm over it. And I mean, we all walk around with little computers in our hands. You can do some research before you come to us. We want you to come to us because we have beautiful histories, and we have vibrant cultures and communities that we want to share with you, but don't put it all on us to do that work for you. And when it comes in terms of land back and Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities working together, it can be done. It has been done. In Wisconsin, you've got, it was back in the 80s with the spearfishing that was going on with the Ojibwe in the north. There were a lot of people who were like, we don't like this, but you had communities come together saying, no, these are our treaty rights. This is something that we're able to do. You saw those things happen at Standing Rock. You saw them happen around Keystone. With Line 3, you're seeing all of that going on. But you're also seeing what Abraham pointed out is you're seeing Indigenous people leading that way, which is what is key. And I know in work that we did with Stockbridge-Munsee with OSI, yes, Charlie and OSI came to us, but we kind of led that initiative ourselves. Like once they brought the concept to us, it was, they very much worked with us as us leading the way to return Pat Skinny back. And so we're forever grateful to Charlie and OSI for that. And I think it's, you know, it's small, but it's significant, because when we are talking about land back, we are talking about land back unequivocally, no strings attached. And again, to point out what Abraham said, it's not that Western thinking where we're going to take the land back and we're going to kick you out of it. That's not how we do things. It's about who does that land not necessarily belong to, but is it back in the proper hands of what it needs to be. There was an article that came out earlier this year in April in the Atlantic about returning stewardship of the national parks to Indigenous people. So it's not closing the national parks. It's not saying you can't go, be in these beautiful places anymore, but who better to steward them and take care of them than the Indigenous people who were forced out of them. And that was a cover story from the Atlantic written by David Troyer, who is Leech Lake Ojibwe, and great author. And so I refer people to look at that and read about that. And then also look to the NDN Collective for more on land back, because it's important, to know about this. And I was in the Black Hills over the summer, did a talk on how the Black Hills were stolen and how they needed to be returned to a group of tourists who came there to hear me speak as I'm telling them why they shouldn't be there. So that was awkward and really fun, but it was receptive, because I had a question, well, what does it look like? So the Black Hills are returned, so what happens? And I'm like, really nothing happens. It's just restoring those rights that we always knew were there. So it's not like the eastern part of Oklahoma, they're going to kick all the non-native people out. But the jurisdiction, the governance, and all of that changes to where it should actually belong, and that is with those Native nations.
Thank you so much. So I do just want to let you know, I did just quickly put into the chat links to both the NDN Collective and also, I believe, the article that you were referencing, Heather. So people can take a look at that. We do have a quick question from Alexis asking, what is one dish, one spoon?
So One Dish, One Spoon was something that was created between the Haudenosaunee and a group of other Indigenous communities. I do believe it's like the Algonquin, as beautiful and big as that fire is, and quite a few other ones. I'm not super specific, but I've always understood that to be a teaching. One dish, one spoon, like it's an official treaty, and I think it's called like the Treaty of Nanfan. So that we had our physical representation of that treaty, which is the One Dish, One Spoon, which was created out of wampum that we got out of trading with wonderful people along the northeast coast, because we don't have quahog up here. And we created this wampum belt. And this wampum belt ultimately became a written document later on, which was some other agreement with Canada involved as well. And the Bay Company. It's a whole Hudson Bay Company. It's a whole complicated history, which I'm not a history expert. I am an ecologist more than anything. But the way that I always understood it was a sharing of space, a sharing of resources. Take what you need for your community and leave the rest for other communities to utilize. And we do this in a way, and for me, what it speaks to is staying away from over harvesting, from greed, and that like these resources that are not, I don't even like using resources as a word, because I feel like that sort of removes that kinship network that is embedded within our cultural framework and our relationship network. resource management, things like that. Like I just have a real issue with it. But what I'm basically saying is it's about that relationship with other communities. It's about that relationship with other aspects of creation, making sure that we are in good relation with each other. And so overharvesting doesn't happen. That there isn't wars over shared resources. And this is where we run into issues of overlapping land claims business in Canada, which is itself, it's like a very complicated thing that we're consistently rubbing up against with Canada, because Western colonial concepts of ownership and space are being consistently applied to areas and where we can exert our rights inappropriately.
I think that concept of the dish with one spoon is, it brings up a lot of really interesting, well, when you consider like, what does land back look like on a massive scale? Like, what would the capital region look like if the Albany area looked like under, shared Mohican and Mohawk ownership and stewardship, and how would the existing society all fit into that? I mean, these kinds of questions are really both confounding, but also really, really fascinating. And but I also wanted to just mention, like, stepping back just a moment to Papscany and Papscany Island, and what Abraham mentioned earlier about sort of just kind of having the humility. And that, I guess there was that question about the, when did the public get interested in land back and stuff? And so I kind of came into the discussion about Papscany Island and the future of its management with an existing background in American Indian Indigenous issues. And so there was a sort of a level of proficiency that was already there, which I think was very helpful, because I didn't necessarily need as much education as most people might. But then again, I was also constantly putting my foot in my mouth and constantly saying the wrong thing, and just having to, and being corrected again and again and again. And in a way that really, I think, improved, my ability to communicate, but also I think it strengthened the relationship to be able to just kind of take those hits and keep rolling, and I was really grateful to Bonnie Hartley at the Stockbridge-Munsee Community and Heather for just kind of taking me, being willing to offer those kinds of corrections when needed. So a little bit of a step back there, but I just wanted to make sure I got that out there. That there's going to be lots of putting the foot in the mouth, that kind of thing. Just part of it comes with the work. But the work is so important that, to let your own pride or something get in the way of making something like this happen would just be, what a shame that would be.
I do have a few more questions, if that's okay. And I thought we could return a little bit to what Abraham, what you were sort of talking a little bit about. So you work in environmental conservation at the Akwesasne Reservation. And I was curious, how does your work, and I think you've referred to this a little bit, but how does your work fit into your cultural beliefs?
Geez, you're about to get a speech. So
wonderful.
So I guess I'm just thinking about the best way to approach this, because for me, it's about thinking from this place, from our place within our context specificity. It's one of my favorite words to use, because what that speaks to is the political, ecological history of a landscape, as well as the biocultural context. And when we're talking about the biocultural context, we're talking about the ways in which our cultures, and specifically for me as a Kanien'kehá:ka person, is emergent from this landscape. And so our politics, our languages, everything that we are is reflective of this landscape and this ecotone that we exist in. So you can't have the great law without the great tree of peace, which is the great white pine. And there's various ways that it's reflected within that tree. And so you see it distributed across this northeastern landscape. And so that's just like a minor example of that. And the way that this emerges within my understanding of my community and of my work, one of my sort of best examples is about fish. And so, and fish and forestry. So I studied forestry in college or in grad school. But, you know, my background and for Akwesasne, fish in the river is everything about us. And so what happened was we experienced the political violence, political ecology that we were subjected to. And what that introduced was this complexity around the United States and Canada dynamic. And let's throw a ringer in there between Quebec and Ontario. Very different provinces. New York, somehow we caught the intersection of everything. We're at the intersection of two different EPA zones. We're at the intersection of two different counties. And it is complicated as all you know. So there's this political landscape that we exist on. And so we really have to think critically about, well, when we are developing projects, when we're developing work that we're going to put into the community, we have to acknowledge that things are going to change based off where we are standing within our own community. So oftentimes I write my grants from the perspective, this is Akwesasne, you're going to tell me what to do. I will spend and do the work as I see fit across Akwesasne. I think a variety of partners have come to understand that that's how I operate. But I introduce them, I walk them along this journey, I educate them, they understand who I am. And I'm very quick to correct. I'm not going to sit here and coddle people. So there's the political landscape that we're talking about. But I also have to acknowledge the impact of residential schools, assimilationist policies, how these impacted our language and our perceptions of each other. And so I like to introduce the concept of appealing to whiteness, and not whiteness as skin color, but whiteness as a structure. Whiteness is a structure that we as BIPOC people are subjected to and aspire to. And I think only within the last 10 to 20 years within Akwesasne, we see a rejection and celebration of ourselves. That I see youth around me celebrating their identity as Ganyak Haga, that they use their Ganyak Geha names, that, unapologetically, when we used to shorten them to make it sit better in people's mouth. But no longer are we doing that. We're out here doing and reclaiming and being so much ourselves. Now, let me bring you to the biocultural aspect of it, right? So everything about us is connected to this landscape. And really what I'm obsessed with right now is this theory around roles and responsibilities as it is taught and conveyed through the Untitled Chapter and reinforced by different processes like our cycles of ceremony on an annual basis. And there is deep data within the stories that we tell. There's deep data in our traditional ecological knowledge of this landscape. We have our own science as an Indigenous community, and we practice that, and we have to reinforce that. But let's remember, again, what we've been subjected to with the assimilation, the environmental violence, which disrupted our relationship with landscapes, made us sick. And so where I sort of see this work and where I see us engaging is drawing on our cultural foundations, which my program is built around. I write my work plan and it's based on the Untitled Chapter. We talk about the great law and what does that mean in here. We talk about the Churo Wampum. We talk about the one dish, one spoon. And I could go on and on about the ways that we bring into this critical theory that was a gift from our ancestors on how to be good stewards for this land of our relationship. And so that's a part of all of our obligation. And so where I'm sort of situating myself in life and the work that I do is that we are reclaiming those reciprocal relationships with creation. That the work I'm doing is all about reinforcing that relationship. That we are looking to teach that a tree is more than a tree is a family member. And that when you are going to take down a tree, you're supposed to explain to that tree what you're going to use it for. And in that process, there's a reflection that happens. Is it worth it? You removing this relationship from the landscape, is it actually worth it? And so that's where my work kind of operates, is under this idea that, like, as the environment gets healthier, we will get healthier as well in this very reciprocal manner. And so we'll see better ecological as well as community health endpoints. And this is me being like, I want to go and continue to write about these things and think critically as critically as an Indigenous ecologist, in the way that Leanne Simpson conceptualizes her work, and in such this beautiful, unapologetic way. So this is all a part of me. I am Akwesasne. I was born and raised here. I will die here, and my babies will be raised here. And I want to make sure that they have their language, that they have access to the medicines, that is their birthright, and that they know how to gather and collect those in a respectful way. And so in the way that my grandmother gave me ononolo, which is sweet flag, for protection, for medicine, I'm going to do that for my children and for my grandchildren. And this will be a part of this long history of intergenerational knowledge that we care for each other across time. So yes, I hope I answered your question in my long little speech I gave here, but this is where I operate from. This is who I am. I am a part of this place. This is where my belly button was buried. And I think Heather gets that.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I thought I would also take this time to also ask a little bit about the return or the reclamation of Papscany Island. So I think we've heard a little bit about how it began, but could you walk us through the process of how do you reclaim land? What does that process look like?
Well, if I recall, Open Space Institute approached us, if I recall that. So Charlie, I would be honored if you would take this question.
Well, yeah, I can say that we, the Open Space Institute, when we first protected the land back in the mid 1990s, we knew that there was a lot of, we knew that it was a very culturally significant place, but over the years that continued to be reinforced. And when I stepped in as land steward in, 2012, something like that, started to build the relationship with the local contact from the Stockbridge-Munsee community, initially kind of talking about things like acknowledgement and interpretation and, how do we convey the story here. But we also, we also began talking about management decisions and, what's the right thing to do in this location? What do you think about this idea? And so as we were talking about ideas, increasingly we were sort of deferring to the Mohican opinion about how we should move forward with management. And so it really made sense ultimately to turn the land over. The process is, it's basically the same as any land sale. Technically, I think, in our case, there was a donation agreement, and then ultimately there was a period for due diligence where the tribe was able to, send their engineers out to make sure that, there were no environmental issues and that sort of thing. And there was on OSI's side, there was board approval. On Stockbridge-Munsee Community side, there was tribal council approval, and then there was the signing of a deed, and the deed was done. But I would also say that, and this kind of goes back to that question about when did the public get interested in this stuff. Of course, Standing Rock was a big moment, and I think since then probably you folks have experienced a flood of land acknowledgement kind of requests and that sort of thing. At OSI, we had been kind of working through a process around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, you know, a lot of the time those processes can seem very just sort of like checking a box, making sure, you know, oh, DEI is the new thing. Let's do DEI now. We're DEI now, you know, whatever. But I think that in our case, at the same time as we were working through getting to know the Stockbridge-Munsee community and talking about what it would look like to transfer the land, and just our attorneys understanding the process and getting familiar with tribal law and the tribe getting familiar with land trusts and land trust work. At the same time as that was going on, our staff and board were also going through a really rigorous DEI process that ultimately I think led to a kind of a shared language around these issues, but also just at, you know, the understanding collectively in the organization was kind of moving along at pace with this idea of, hey, shouldn't we be giving this land back? So that by the time there were any kind of approvals to be had, you know, everybody who hadn't been up to speed was very up to speed. And so, you know, this was a very, it's something that, you know, one might think would be very controversial, but it was very non-controversial at OSI, certainly. And so, you know, when I know that those processes can seem kind of, you know, again, just like phoning it in or checking a box. And I think in our case, it really sort of helped the organization, helped facilitate making this happen. And, you know, so I think that's, well, anyway, something to think about if you're working in an organization that's going through that process and you're rolling your eyes. In fact, actually, you know, you might find that it can be a valuable precursor to doing the real work.
And I think important to point out that it's only as complicated as you make it. Like, it was a very simple, seamless process. And I think what was really great, what I remember being very grateful for, the fact that like OSI came to the table already prepared with an understanding of the importance and significance of Akwesasne Island, and understood what it meant to the Stockbridge-Munsee community, because it's a significant piece of land, and it's a land, as Charlie pointed out, that has been under threat more than once for development. And so the fact that, you know, I mean, I think if you're a piece of land in the United States that could possibly be developed, it's always under threat. But I think this just gives it another added layer of protection, and returning a piece of land that is so significant to the community. I think that's really important. And, you know, it's not the first of its kind. The Minnesota Historical Society just worked in partnership to return a significant piece of land to the Dakota that are in the area, where it was the if you know anything about the Dakota Uprising, they're, you know, significant piece of land that was returned. And so I think that it's not a foreign concept. It's something that can be done if the party that is currently stewarding or owns the land wants it to be done. So, and again, as Charlie pointed out, it's not difficult. I equate it almost to a repatriation. Same processes, sort of, except it doesn't have to go in the Federal Registry when you're repatriating from a museum like it does. But it was very seamless. And I think what was helpful is OSI did their work, and they knew the significance of the land before they even came to the table. And they were like, we stewarded it for X amount of years, and we believe that you need to be the stewards of this now. So it was very significant, and I was great. It was probably, it really was how I ended my time at Stockbridge-Munsee Community, was with the return of that island. So it's very cool.
So it is 3 o'clock. And I just wanted to ask, does anyone have anything else they would like to say? Any concluding remarks?
I do think we should point out that it is Indigenous Peoples Day, and to remember that you cannot discover something that was never lost, and nothing is new if 10 million or more people were already living here. So, and also just because I'm very petty. Columbus was a very bad navigator. He thought he was in the East Indies. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for that reminder. It is important. Yes, it is Indigenous Peoples Day. Brilliant. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to say?
Well, I would just say I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Very grateful to have had the opportunity to work with Heather and her community on on a piece of land up outside of Albany. But yeah, and really just looking forward to learning more about how OSI and the land trust community broadly can serve Indigenous communities. I think that, I mean, it's been said again and again that the sort of founding sin of the American nation is what was perpetrated against Indigenous people, and there's all kinds of questions around what does reconciliation look like, and I think that as organizations that work with land, we have a special opportunity, I think, to be a part of that reconciliation process. And I happen to believe that a land needs its people, and that we would all benefit from the presence, the increased presence, and the perspective of our land's Indigenous peoples.
And I wholeheartedly support both of those statements. Like, this is Indigenous Peoples Day, to celebrate, the communities that were and are still here. Columbus Day was established as kind of like a lame holiday, like not that long ago. It's not something that's been celebrated for like a very, very long time and has a deep history. I think that's important to recognize that. But also, I think I'm just really happy to be able to do the work that I do and to be a part of different panels and talk with such great individuals and learn. I really loved what Heather had to share. I really loved what Charlie had to share. And, just to kind of piggyback a little bit off of Charlie's stuff, I really think about the ways that Indigenous people are going to be critical in addressing climate change, and helping shift the paradigms around our relationship with creation around us and how we impact that. And there is research that shows that, primarily Indigenous people oversee the majority of biodiversity around the world over the lands that we maintain stewardship and rights over. And I think that is a part of when Indigenous people have the opportunity to express ourselves unapologetically on a landscape, that we will see those better ecological health endpoints. That species at risk and rare species presence on those landscapes is not something that we work like intentionally to put on those landscapes, but it's a part of that relational network that when we are out there that we reinforce, we make sure are present. So that's kind of like where I see is, let us, like, Indigenous people are important parts of the conversation. And when you are at a table where you see no Indigenous people present and Indigenous issues are being addressed, that you speak up and say that this is inappropriate. Speak up for us and understand that, you know, the fights we have, we're not necessarily always in the right rooms, and also respect our space, that we're tired, and that, you know, these fights that we are on are consistent, and to respect our energy. And so thank you. I guess those are my closing words.
No, thank you, especially thank you for reminding me about your energy, because you all took time out of your day on what is a federally recognized holiday to talk to me, each other, and our viewers about something that is really important. So I just want to thank you once again so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, times a million, for taking part in this conversation. I will only speak for myself by saying I feel like I learned a lot. I have 80 more questions, but once again, just thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yawa, Ana.
Anewe, Nishik.